In this lecture, we'll be situating Al-Qaeda in the greater theological context of the Muslim world. So let's start with this PowerPoint slide, and let me walk you from sort of the outside to Al-Qaeda itself. Islam is the second largest faith system in the world. There's approximately 1.4 billion Muslims around the world, and 85% of that community are Sunni, approximately. Sunni Islam has four primary schools of interpretation that really define the different practices of Sunni Islam around the world. These are really complex interpretations of Islam. It's important to note that there is no hierarchy of religious authority in Sunni Islam the way there is in, for example, the Catholic Church, where there is a pope and there are cardinals and bishops, and through this hierarchy, an individual Catholic can really learn exactly what it is that is appropriate and what it is that is inappropriate according to the religious authority that they look up to, in this case the Pope. For Sunni Islam, an individual Sunni scholar reads and understands the Quran and the Hadith, the biographical stories of the sayings and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, and provides a fatwa on a given question. A fatwa, again, is a religious legal opinion drawn from this expertise. Well, for 1400 years, scholars have been grappling with these really complex texts and issuing their fatwa, their religious legal opinions. And over time, those have amassed into these different schools of interpretation. There are some today who believe that Islam should serve not just as a source of spiritual inspiration and guidance, but also as a political ideology. And we refer to this as Islamism, right? The idea that Islam should be the source of governance in a given Muslim country. There are some that think that this 400 years of interpretation, these four traditional schools or mainstream schools of Islamic jurisprudence, are actually the problem. One of the reasons that the Muslim community is politically weak after World War I is these modern interpretations, or these traditional interpretations of Islam, have really corrupted or watered down the faith. And we often refer to these as fundamentalist movements. In the Arab Middle East, the primary form of fundamentalism is Salafism, or Salafi Islam. And the term, again, Salafi, refers to the first three generations of Muslims who learned Islam and practiced Islam in sort of the presence and direction of the Prophet Muhammad. In South Asia, the term is Deobandi. Deobandism is the primary strain of fundamentalist Sunni Islam, and that's named after the town in India where the Deobandi movement created its first madrasas or seminaries, and for where that movement spread. Then there are some Muslims who believe that in order to create a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam as the primary form of Islam and the primary political form of Islam, violence is necessary. And we refer to these groups as violent jihadist groups or jihadist groups. Al-Qaeda is a very small vanguard organization that inserts itself into violent conflicts, surrounds itself with already violent organizations, and tries to reorient those violent organizations in order to achieve that fundamentalist political end state in which Sunni Islam, of their interpretation, is the dominant form of governance in that society. They therefore argue that Al-Qaeda sits on the periphery of Islam, right? 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And let me unpack that for you. What I mean is that a group like Al-Qaeda draws on specific Sunni doctrine from the medieval ages that is part of Orthodox Sunni belief, right? There are two ideas in particular. The first is Tawheed. Tawheed means monotheism, and this is one of the pillars of Islam. And so to talk about the importance of monotheism to a Sunni Muslim seems unassailable on the surface. But for Al-Qaeda, Tawheed is not just the idea that there is one God, but it's an extension of that. If there is one God, there must only be one way to worship that God. There must only be one interpretation of Islamic jurisprudence that is correct, and therefore all the other interpretations are incorrect. And all of the other ways to worship God are incorrect. In fact, they're not Islamic at all. So this maximalist interpretation of monotheism forms the basis for Al-Qaeda's ability to choose who is a true Muslim and therefore condemn everyone who is not a true Muslim. That practice of takfir that I mentioned in the last lecture. Al-Qaeda also relies on the orthodox Sunni concept of taqlid, which is emulation of the Prophet Muhammad and an literal interpretation of the Quran. Now, the Quran in the Muslim faith is the word of God. It's God in literate, right? This is as close as you can get to the divine on earth, and in fact, the text itself is divine. The Prophet Muhammad is the best example of what it means to be a Muslim. And so, of course, on the surface, when Al-Qaeda says that one should emulate the Prophet Muhammad and hold the Quran above everything else, this seems unassailable. The problem is that if you don't prioritize the right passages of the Quran, if you try to contextualize those passages in ways that Al-Qaeda disagrees with, if you don't follow the right moments of the Prophet Muhammad's example and disregard some of the others, then Al-Qaeda will deem that you're not a true Muslim, and they'll use this practice called takfir, which means to declare a Muslim to be a non-Muslim or an infidel, a kafir. So takfir is this idea of excommunicating a Muslim from the faith, and with it comes the penalty of death, according to some Al-Qaeda scholars. Well, the problem here is that takfir is the second greatest sin in Sunni Islam. The only greater sin is that of idolatry, of worshiping more than one God. In traditional Sunni Islam, it's not for individual Sunnis to judge other Sunnis. That's for God to decide, right? And so for Al-Qaeda to take on that responsibility of judging who is a Muslim and who is a non-Muslim for themselves is a really divisive practice. It creates what is called fitna, or chaos, discord within the Muslim community. And you can imagine, if you're trying to lead and grow and cultivate a faith community, but individual members of that community get to decide for themselves who is in and who is out, who is pious and who is not pious, it can create a lot of problems. And so over time, this has become a really heretical process. And so you'll often see references in Arab media or from Muslim political leaders, references to Al-Qaeda and its associated movement as a takfiri organization. This is an organization that practices this sinful form of excommunication. And it's a term of abuse, right? It's meant to undermine their authority, the same authority that Al-Qaeda tries to garner when they use terms like tawheed and taqlid. So here you have this group that both uses Orthodox Sunni Islam but also violates concepts of Orthodox Sunni Islam in their behaviors, insinuating itself into violent conflicts, trying to reorient that violence because they believe it is necessary to use violence to create a fundamentalist political interpretation of Sunni Islam as the dominant form of Islam in the world. Once they're successful in that, they will then go on what is called offensive jihad and try to Islamicize the rest of the world. So Al-Qaeda has an expansive understanding of its mission as a vanguard, trying to really mobilize a much broader community through its violent actions over time.